Good morning and welcome to a very packed cavern. I never thought I'd say those words in my lifetime. I am Martin Nolan, co-founder, executive director of Julien's Auctions, known worldwide as the auction house to the stars. We are here at the cavern at the Beatles Story Museum in Liverpool in the UK, home to the greatest, most famous band of all time, the Beatles. And I am so excited to be here on behalf of our entire team at Julien's Auctions. We have a huge announcement today, a big unveiling, a big reveal, if you will. Julien's, we have a long history with the Beatles Story Museum. We love what they are doing here. They are continuing the legacy of the Beatles. They continue to tell the story, preserve the history. And in part at Julien's Auctions, that's what we do as well. We have great fun traveling the world, discovering, uncovering, finding, searching for Beatles instruments. And today will be no exception to our rule. We were the first auction house to sell a guitar for more than $1 million. That was, of course, back in 2015. We sold John Lennon's guitar that was stolen from the Christmas shows in 1963. And we sold that for $2.4 million. That was 2015. Very soon after that, in the same year, we did a huge auction for Ringo Starr, a friend of Julien's. So Ringo and his lovely wife, Barbara Bach, came to us to do their auction when they moved from the UK back to Beverly Hills, and that was hugely successful. Of course, recently, this year, people will remember that we sold the Hootenanny, and I love saying that because it was a guitar played by John Lennon and George Harrison that was found in an attic after 50 years. The guitar case, which was original to the guitar, had been discarded. We had to save that from the skip, and that sold for almost $3 million. So that'll give you an idea of how collectible the Beatles still are today. As I'm talking to you here at the cavern at the Beatles Story Museum, of course, we have a crowded room. The exhibition opened almost 2 hours ago here. Every day they're open, and I see lines of people filing in, going through incredible exhibits, amazing artifacts, original musical instruments from the Beatles. So it's amazing to see that here in Liverpool, of course, as I said, the home of the Beatles. And if you're just joining me and you hear me ranting on, I am, of course, Martin Nolan from Julien's Auctions. And I am here with a very special announcement. We have a big auction coming up in November at the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. That takes place on November 20, 21, and 22. Huge auction, all the greats represented. What we have here will also be taken center stage. So I'm excited to reveal to you what we have to show you today. But keeping in mind, if you can't be in Nashville for this historic auction, you can go to juliensauctions.com. You can register to bid in the auction and be a part of what we think will be huge rock and roll and certainly huge Beatles history. So what I'm about to reveal today is something truly special. You think about George Harrison. He was an apprentice electrician, 16 years of age, back in 1959. Probably a very happy occasion for parents of a 16-year-old who chooses to train for a trade. And as an electrician, you'd always have a job. So George Harrison also loved to play music, and he loved guitars, and he was a great musician. That was his true passion. So his parents were very supportive of his passion. And when I'm talking about the Beatles, I'm talking about the Quarrymen that then became the Silver Beatles and then became later known as, that we all know today, as the Beatles. So when we talk about the Beatles today, we think of them as being super famous. It's hard to imagine that they were just another band back then, 1959, 1960, 1961, playing gigs every day, going here, going there, trying to make it. And in fact, it wasn't until February of 1964 when the Beatles were invited to perform on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was one of the biggest shows in America. Something over 70 million people watched that show when the Beatles performed. And that was the Beatles coming to America. And that's when they became a hugely famous band that we still love today. And, you know, as I said, Ringo Starr is a great friend of Julian's. We work on many projects together. Paul McCartney is also very supportive of us, and we work with Paul. In fact, I met Paul recently at the Grammy Museum at the Music Here's dinner back in February in Los Angeles when John Bon Jovi was honoured as Person of the Year, and Paul, of course, is as gracious as ever. So with all that, I think it's now time for me to perhaps make this revelation. I thank everyone for coming here today. Really honoured that people came out to see this unveiling. I know that later I'll be talking with Frida Kelly, good old Frida, who was the Beatles secretary from start to finish, the Beatles fan club secretary. So she knows a lot, and she probably will recognize and remember this guitar. So, again, Martin Nolan, Julien's Auctions, unveiling and revealing this really iconic, very special, important guitar played by George Harrison. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we know as the Futurama. It's an incredible guitar. It's one of two most played guitars by George Harrison. Andy Babiuk, who is a renowned Beatles historian. He's written books about the Beatles gear. He would be considered as a Beatles gear expert. He has worked out that George Harrison played this guitar more than 324 times here in Liverpool and on numerous shows in Hamburg in 1960 and again in 1961. In fact, right up to October 3rd, 1962, that was the last time that the Beatles performed in Hamburg at the, I think it was the Sky Club. And it happened to be October 3rd, 1962, which by my calculation, that's 62 years ago to this day. So that's purely coincidental, but just a happy coincidence. So the Futurama, this guitar was made in Czechoslovakia. So back in 1951, the British government, they placed an embargo on importing musical instruments because they were trying to preserve home industry. And they wanted people to manufacture and make musical instruments here at home, keep people employed, understandably so. Buddy Holly in the mid-50s, he played a Fender Strat. And the Chirpin Crickets album cover had a photograph of Buddy Holly playing his Fender Strat. And a young George Harrison saw that and thought, wow, that's the guitar that he would love to play. And in fact, most musicians here in the UK and in Europe would have also been desiring to play a Fender Strat. So that wasn't available for purchase. So this company in Czechoslovakia, they made this guitar. So this is 1958. It's a resonant guitar. It's an electric solid body, maple neck. On the back, the serial number 1126. George liked it because it looked futuristic, and that's what he was going for, that's what he was hoping for. So back in November 1959, a young George Harrison and Paul McCartney walked into Frank Hesse's music shop here in Liverpool. And as I came through the shop here at the Beatles Story Museum this morning, right there is the original sign for Frank Hesse's music shop. So that's sort of like, wow, that's incredible that that's here. And this is where this guitar was purchased. So George and Paul went into Frank Hesse's. The wall was lined with guitars. And George took down this guitar. And Paul went to play it. So Paul had it plugged it into the amp, turned up the volume, no sound. George hit one of the rocker switches, 1, 2, 3. Boom! Massive sound. All the guitars fell off the floor, according to Paul McCartney, who was there at the time. And that was the beginning of this particular guitar in the life of the Beatles. So, very historic. Again, I mentioned that George Harrison was an apprentice to become an electrician. 16, 17 years of age. He didn't have 55 guineas, and 55 guineas at the time, a guinea I think is £1 and a shilling, so we're talking about probably 57, 58 British pounds, close to 100 US dollars at the time. He didn't have that, so Hesse's offered a hire purchase agreement. As George himself said, you pay the first payment and they hope they find you for the next 44 payments, as it was. I got to look at the actual hire purchase agreement, which was, George was too young to enter into a contract for a purchase of such an expensive guitar at the time, even though in today's world it would seem truly inexpensive, probably worth about £1,200 today, 1,700 US dollars. But so Mrs. E. Harrison, and George Harrison's mother was named Louise, so maybe she used E for, in case that there was a default in payment, they couldn't find who Mrs. E. Harrison was. I don't know. Or maybe she fancied herself as Elvis, Mrs. Elvis Harrison. I don't know. But that's how the hire purchase agreement was signed, November 20, 1959. And then they had 44 weeks to pay off. In fact, it took them 48 weeks to make the final payment. But again, it was the beginning of an incredible performer. George Harrison was a fantastic guitar player. He had accumulated quite a lot of guitars thereafter. But like I said, this was one of the two most played guitars. He referred to this as a dog to play, so it wasn't easy, but he loved the sound that it created. And you think about it, this is the guitar that was really responsible when they did the auditions to get hired to go to Hamburg in Germany in 1960. They did something like over 106 shows, and that would be 3 or 4 hours every day. And then there was a huge homecoming in December 1960 at the Lichfield Theatre here, and they had a packed audience, and the promoter for the show billed it as live from Hamburg. And at the time, Beatles were not known. 70% of the audience thought these guys were from Germany, and Paul McCartney goes on to talk about that. And he said they came in their leather jackets, they looked different than the local bands. And he said that when everyone then heard them talking Liverpudlian, he said, everyone said, wow, those guys can really speak good English. And of course, they were from down the road here in Liverpool. But again, that was a huge... And then they started playing in the Cavern in February 1961. That was the start when they do the lunchtime shows. And that's when Frida Kelly, I talked about Frida earlier, who I'll be talking to in a little while, she was the secretary for the Beatles fan club from the start to the finish, and she was a typist here in Liverpool, and she would go to the lunchtime performances of the Beatles every single day, just became a huge fan, and pretty much gave all her youth to the Beatles and helping George's mother, Ringo's mother, John's aunt, Paul's parents to respond to fan mail, etc. So this was a fantastic guitar. But George then replaced it circa 1962 with the Gretsch Duo, which is played just as heavily as this particular Futurama guitar for the life of the Beatles. And that guitar is actually owned by Olivia and Danny Harrison, who of course are George's family. So again, an incredible guitar, just a beauty. You can see it was a workhorse. It's heavy. You can see that it's so marked. You know that this was heavily played throughout the career. But it is very, very special. And like I said, this is a guitar that is going to go to auction, Julien's auctions, November 20, 21, and 22 at our Played, Worn and Torn, our second annual auction at the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum. In Nashville, Tennessee, as I gingerly place that here. So in 1964, the Beats Instruments magazine, Sean O'Mahony was the editor. And at that stage, they were still trying to make the Beatles famous. Again, I remind everyone, like, they just weren't born famous. They had to work every day and play huge amounts of concerts and shows and halls and travel all over. They went back to Hamburg again. They did over 90 shows or something in 1961, and then the last show again was October 3rd, 1962. But 64, Sean O'Mahony, the editor of the Beats Instruments, which was sort of very aligned with the Beatles, was doing a lot of promotion for the Beatles, and he decided to offer to have a contest for the fans, and they could win this guitar. So he asked George if he would donate a guitar, and he gave him this guitar. And Sean O'Mahony then crafted an advert in the July 1964 issue of Beats Instruments. In fact, we're going to have that particular magazine on display with the guitar here at the Beatles Story Museum. We're here for the next 2 weeks, so October 17th. So we invite people to come and see this amazing guitar. But how it changed hands from George was he gave it up for auction. And there's an image of the guitar case, and I'll just pull the guitar case center stage because this is the original Selmer case. You see a sticker on top here for the ferry for Hamburg, when they went to Hamburg in 1960, and again, of course, 61 and in 62. The original case, if this case could talk, it's been with this guitar forever. So in the advert for the contest, they took a photograph of the case filled with fan mail. So July 64, as I mentioned, the Beatles had performed in New York at the Ed Sullivan Show in February of 64. So then the fan mail just was a deluge. And so they filled this with fan mail, great photograph. And that was to promote the contest. And the question you had to write in, and for our younger audience here today, that's when we had to write a letter, put it in an envelope, buy a stamp, mail it, and you'd hope it would be delivered in 1 to 2 weeks' time. It's not none of this emails and texting and TikToking and all of Instagram and Facebook and all that. We didn't have that. We did things the old-fashioned way. And you know what? We still made it here. But the question was, like, what are the top 10 most important things you should look for when you go to buy a guitar? Was it the weight? Was it the color? Was it the number of strings? Et cetera, electric, acoustic, all of that. And so the winner was announced in November of 1964. A gentleman by the name of A.J. Thompson, and he was from Saltdean, which I understand is near Brighton, here in the UK. So he came up to Liverpool to meet with Sean O'Mahony at his office, and Sean asked him, does he play guitar? And he said, no, he didn't play guitar. And Sean said, well, would you rather have the money? And A.J. Thompson, if you're watching, we'd love to hear from you. But he chose the money instead, which was probably, if the guitar was selling for £58, £59, £60, somewhere like that, we're talking, that's probably the amount of money that Sean O'Mahony would have paid him for the intrinsic value of the guitar. It wouldn't have had any sort of, no one realized how important these instruments would be, or how collectible they would be, or how valuable they would be. And like, now these are selling, as I mentioned earlier, in the millions. And people see these as, yeah, it's pop culture, it's Beatles history, but it's also, it's an asset class. People look upon these as, you own this today, and in years to come, you'll likely sell it for more than you pay for it. And you've had a tangible asset, something you, like, it's almost like it's a work of art in its own right, but it's something you could pick up and play and enjoy, entertain your friends. If you have it in your home, it's a great conversation piece. And so that's why these items are selling for huge money today. And will continue, because we see just incredible increased interest in collectibles. We had a huge auction in Hong Kong on Saturday, over $3 million for 80 plus lots in the sale. So that will speak to how people look upon these as really, they're sought after and a good investment. And they're fun piece of art, if you will, to actually own, and a great conversation piece. So A.J. Thompson then took the money, and Sean O'Mahony, the editor of the Beats Instruments magazine, kept it with his family for many, many years. It changed hands in 2019, and so the owner of the guitar now has come to us because he read about the hootenanny which we sold back in May for, as I said, almost $3 million. So that'll give you an idea. This guitar, we are estimating 600 to 800,000 US dollars. And because of its history, because of its connection to George Harrison and the Beatles, and it's so well documented, the provenance is solid, comes with its original case, the Beats magazines, etc. I think it should certainly sell for more than $1 million, and who knows, because again, it's getting harder and harder to find really important Beatles instruments coming to the auction, and so I am excited to see how well this does. So again, this is part of our Played, Worn and Torn, our second annual auction at the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. How are y'all doing? And if you can't be in Nashville, though we invite you to come because it's a fun town, you can go to juliansauctions.com. So you can register for the auction today. You will, on auction day, you can be a part of this historic event, just as today is a historic event. You can see and hear the auctioneer live streaming all over the world. And if you're registered, you can click those buttons and bid. As I said, it's not just one item. It's a 3-day auction, so probably 600-800 items going on the auction block. But this will be one of the most important pieces in the sale. And that's why we felt at Julien's it's important that we bring it back to Liverpool. We're sort of bringing it home for one more time, if you will, and giving people here in Liverpool an opportunity to see the guitar that was bought on hire purchase at Frank Hessey's down the road with the original shop sign here at the Beatles Story Museum. I'm speaking to you from the cavern at this Beatles Story Museum, which is a great honor for me to be here. And it's just amazing to have this guitar in my hands. It sort of gives me chills to think I'm the caretaker of something so iconic and so important to the success of the Beatles, and we're still celebrating their success. Sadly, we lost George back in 2001. We lost John back in 1980, but we still have Ringo and Paul keeping the memory alive, still playing the music, still entertaining us. And then we have an opportunity to own iconic instruments like this. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's just a true honor for me to stand here alongside something so iconic and present it to the world, because people all over the world are tuning in and hearing, maybe just joining now. But again, I'm Martin from Julien's Auctions, and we are presenting this to the world after the exhibition here, which will run for 2 weeks, circa around October 17, 18. The exhibition will end here. Then we'll go to New York City to exhibit there, and then on to Nashville, Tennessee, to the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville, and then culminating in the auction. So I want to thank you sincerely for your time today, for joining me on this big reveal on the launch of our Played, Worn and Torn auction, and to talk to you about something so iconic and so important, so historic. And we're excited to begin this journey, and we now leave this guitar in the capable hands of our friends Mary, Charlotte, and the whole team here at the Beatles Story Museum in Liverpool, because they're doing such an incredible job. It is, if you come to the UK, come to Liverpool, you have to see what they have created here. As I walk through this amazing museum, I see all the incredible instruments. I see all the photographs. And right where we're going to display this, there happen to be just about 4 photographs of George Harrison playing this guitar at various performances. We also have a great photograph of the Beatles 4, a photograph taken by Astrid Kushner, and that, in fact, is in the sale as well. So if you buy the guitar, it would be amazing to have that photograph taken by that famous photographer of the 4 Beatles together, and of course George with this really important Futurama guitar. So with that, have a fantastic day. And thank you from Julien's Auctions for joining us this morning from Liverpool.